Good morning, ladies. Very warm welcome to She Rebuilds the World Women Empowerment and Leadership Program. And today, I think it's important to notice that, like, we women have the rights. Sometimes we don't know about them. Sometimes we are not aware what are our rights and what we can do and what we can't do. So I don't believe that women empowerment or women leadership could be of their great relevance if we would not know our rights. So knowing our rights, like as women, as regard to household, as regard to our assets, like as regard to, let's say, inheritance, or in the worst case, like if you get divorced, I think it's very, very important for us women to know what we can require, what are our rights, and how we can be protected. Also, another thing which is I think is extremely important all over the world, where women are violated, not just morally, physically, but also sexually. And I think it's also important for us to know if something happens like that, it's not acceptable, it's illegal, and we cannot just say it's the way the life is. So it's important to know also where you can go, like where you can seek the information and assistance in these cases too. So we are very happy actually that we launched a couple of weeks ago the workshops for Zambian, Namibian, and Zimbabwean ladies on their rights. And today we have a beautiful, smart lawyer from Lusaka, Bessa, who is a friend of our friends, so she's part of our Share Build the World community. And I think I'm going to give a floor to Bessa herself to introduce her. So, and also, if you could tell us, like what would be the best way, how we can listen to your presentation, we can get the knowledge, how we can protect ourselves. And also, if we have any questions, then of course, I'm going to follow the chat on YouTube link, and Bessa going to guide me when and how we're going to have the sessions for the questions. Bessa, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for joining our team today.
Thank you, Leva. Good morning to you all. As Elia introduced, my name is Vesa Mwansa. I'm a lawyer by profession, a women's rights activist, and I'm currently executive director for an organization known as Young Women in Action. We're based in Lusaka, Zambia. So I'm looking forward to a fruitful deliberation. Our presentation is in different parts. So firstly, we're going to look into women's rights in general, what our laws provide for. Then we're going to look at different legal issues. We're going to look at the issues around contracts, the issues around entrepreneurship, to be specific. How can you register a company? We're going to look at the issues of marriage, the different types of marriage that are recognized under the Zambian law. How are these marriages dissolved? Then we're also going to look at the issues around inheritance. What happens in an instance where the deceased has left behind a will? What happens in a case where there's no will at all? So we actually have legal provisions that speak to all those different circumstances. With regards to how we're going to proceed with this presentation, we will start with highlighting the different women's rights. After that session, we're going to pause a little and just open it up for questions, for clarifications. Then we're going to look at the different sectors of the law. At the end of each session also, we'll open it up just to get questions or if at all there's need for any clarity. So please feel free to take advantage of the pauses at each particular point so that you can just get the clarity that you would want around the different issues that we're going to discuss today. So we'll get started.
You see?
Yes. So we can move to the first slide.
I'm sorry, something is wrong.
Okay. So I will just begin to speak to the second slide as we are waiting for our IT, our IT expert. So the first thing that we need to know about the Zambia legal system is that Zambia has a dual legal system. So what that means is that Zambia recognizes customary law and statutory law. So when we're speaking to customary law, we're speaking to all the various customs in this country. These customs are not documented, so mostly it's passed on by word of mouth. But our laws actually recognize the aspect of customary law. Then we have statutory law. So the statutory law are the laws that are codified. These are the ones that you can actually get a codified document. For example, if you're looking for a law on marriage, you can find a written down piece of law that you can refer to for purposes of issues around marriage. So, what we need to remember at this point is that with us in Zambia, we recognize both customary and statutory law. However, our constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, by that I mean all laws that we have in this country are supposed to conform to the constitution. So our constitution provides under Article 1 that customary law and customary practices will be recognized so long as they are not inconsistent with the constitution. So what that simply means is that there are certain customs that will not stand because they are not in alignment with the provisions that we have in our constitution. So as we go down in this presentation, you'll be able to understand and actually see why certain customs are actually against um, the provisions that we have in our constitution. Secondly, we also have to recognize that in Zambia, we uphold women's rights. Zambia has ratified different regional instruments. So at regional level, at the AU level, which is the African Union, Zambia has committed itself to certain international instruments. Some of them include the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa. It's also known as the Maputo Protocol. So these instruments highlight the different rights that women have on this African continent. Other than that, also at international level, which is the United Nations level, Zambia also has committed itself to various international instruments. These include the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Convention on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, and the Popular Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which is the CEDAW. So when it comes to our legal system, what is supposed to happen is that when Zambia goes, whether it's at the UN level or at the AU level, whichever instrument that we commit ourselves to, for it to have a binding effect in our country, we are supposed to ratify. That is the process. So the ratification and domestication process involves these international instruments being tabled in our National Assembly and then being incorporated in the different laws that we have. So once that process is done, then these instruments are going to have a binding effect in terms of implementation. And also, it's even easier for us, especially us women, for those who are privileged to work for women's rights organization. It means that you actually have a legal framework that you can refer to when you're making reference to women's rights. So I just felt that it's very important for us to have that basic understanding of where we're coming from and what we have in place as Zambia, which is our guiding principles when it comes to issues around women's rights. We're going to move on to the next slide that is going to speak to the specific rights that have been recognized in one of the key pieces of legislation in Zambia, which is the Gender Equity and Equality Act. So we can move on to the next slide. So in Zambia, we have a very progressive law that looks into the welfare of women, and it's known as the Gender Equity and Equality Act. So this particular piece of legislation actually has domesticated those instruments that I had referred to in the previous slide. So we have sections 14, sections 20, sections 21, and section 22. These ones highlight the specific women's rights that are recognized under our Zambian law. So I am going to highlight these rights and also speak to them so that we can all have a general understanding of what it is that we're referring to. So the first right that is recognized is that a woman has an equal right with a man to acquire, to change, and to retain her nationality. So this means that even a woman is able to choose which nationality she wants to hold. If you're in Zambia, for example, you have that right for you to acquire a Zambian nationality. If you ever get an opportunity to relocate to a different country, you actually have that particular right to change your nationality to whichever nationality of your preference. So in the past, what used to happen is that it was automatic. When you are married, you gain the nationality of your husband. So women did not have that power to actually choose which nationality they wanted to acquire or to retain or even to change. So this particular piece of legislation has given women that opportunity for them to actually recognize that they even have that right to choose which nationality they would want for themselves. The second one is that a woman has an equal right with a man to choose the nationality of their children. This also is a very sensitive area. If you are an African, you know that in most cases, when it comes to issues of children, the power is given to the man. So it's the man who will choose the names, choose the nationality, any other issues to do with children. But this law recognizes that even a woman can actually choose the nationality of their children. The third is that a woman has a right to access sexual and reproductive health services. This is also a very sensitive area because when we talk about sexuality, you find that who is actually making the decisions for the woman? Who is making those decisions? So this particular provision recognizes that even a woman can choose issues around reproductive services. So when we're speaking to issues of reproductive services, we're speaking to issues of family planning. This is a very crucial point. This is a very crucial area for a woman because if you're in a reproductive age, it means that at some point you actually have to have access to sexual and reproductive services. So our law recognizes that as a woman, you have that right to access. It means you can go to a health center and ask for this service. Primarily, government-owned clinics, health centers, or hospitals are supposed to provide these services for free because this is a human right. So that is one of the rights that we need to uphold as women, but also we need to claim for these rights. We can move on to the next slide. The fifth right is that a woman has a right to be protected from sexually transmitted infections. This also borders on the issues of sexuality. So as a woman, you actually have a right to be protected. You actually have the right to inquire on the status of your partner in terms of issues around sexually transmitted infections, issues around HIV. In most cases, especially for the women in a marital setup, this can be a challenge. It's very difficult for you to actually exercise this right because in Zambia, mostly when it comes to sexuality, it's the man who decides what type of contraceptive will be used in that home. If a woman, for example, is found in possession of condoms, that can be a problem because she'll be labeled as a woman who's promiscuous. Why would you be why would you be moving around with condoms? But this right is actually saying, as a woman, you have the right to self-protection from sexually transmitted infections. Day in, day out, we hear a lot of women who are infected with different infections because they could not exercise this right to actually self-protect themselves from sexually transmitted infections. The other right that is recognized by our law is that a woman has a right to choose the number of children and when to bear those children. Again, this is very sensitive. In most cases, it's the man who decides how many children this couple is going to have and when. But we know that as women, we are the ones who carry the pregnancy, we are the ones who give birth. So this law is actually recognizing to say, as a woman, you actually have that right to choose how many children you're going to have and when you're going to bear those children. This also, like I said, is sensitive because we have so many women who, because they want to hold on to this marriage, they would continuously have children despite it having a risk on their health, without realizing that they actually have this right to choose how many children are going to have and when they're going to have these children. The eighth one is also very related to this one. A woman has a right to control fertility. So this also borders on the issues of family planning. Then a woman has a right to choose an appropriate method of contraception. This is also a sexual and reproductive health issue. So it means that whatever contraception that you choose is not supposed to be imposed. We know that we have various contraceptions that are available at our disposal as women. Some of them are injectables, some of them are orally taken. Then we also have those that are inserted in a woman's reproductive system. All those are different types of contraceptions that you can choose from. So you actually have the right to choose which one will work for you as a woman. Then lastly, when it comes to rights around sexual and reproductive health, our law recognizes that a woman has a right to choose whether or not to have a child. This one is subject to other pieces of legislation that we have in Zambia. When it comes to issues of termination of a pregnancy, we have what is known as the Termination of Pregnancy Act. It's a very old law, 1972, but it has grounds on which a woman can access a safe abortion. I will just, in summary, run through these grounds. One is that the birth of this unborn child is going to affect the emotional and physical well-being of the woman. There's the economic aspect also, the fact that the birth of this child is going to affect the economic well-being of this woman. The third is that the birth of this child is going to affect the other existing children. An example I can give is that we have women who conceive maybe 1 month post giving birth. So now you have this risk of this other child affecting the already existing baby. So that could be one of the grounds. Then also there's the issue of what the child being born with a defect. That also can be a ground. Then Leva, earlier you had spoken to the issues of sexual violence. So if you're a victim of sexual violence, whether it's rape, so rape we know is sexual intercourse with a woman above the age of 18 against her will. Then we have the children, those below the age of 16. That one is known as defilement. So we have women and girls who fall pregnant as a result of sexual violence. So those also, that can be a ground for you to access illegal abortion. So most of these government hospitals actually provide this service. I'm bringing this out because aside from this Determination of Pregnancy Act and the recognition of this right, we also have the Penal Code. So the Penal Code is the one that outlines different offenses that we have in Zambia. And one of them is that an illegal abortion is actually an offense. it attracts a penalty of up to 7 years. So if you don't go the safe abortion route, you actually stand a chance of being arrested and persecuted for committing an abortion. And the maximum sentence is 7 years. So we've actually had cases of women, young women, being incarcerated for committing this particular offense. So we need to know as women that there's actually the legal way of going about certain things because it's provided by our law and it's also recognized as a woman's rights issue. So we can move on to the next slide. Then when it comes to issues of marriage, our law recognizes the different rights that women and men have on an equal basis in marriage. The first being a woman has an equal right to a man to freely choose a spouse. So this means that a woman cannot be forced to go into a marriage against her will because our law recognizes this as a right for a woman to choose a spouse. The second is the right for a woman to enter and to leave a marriage. So you as a woman has the right to get married, firstly, and also to leave. So on the aspect of leaving a marriage, we're talking about divorce. There are a lot of myths surrounding the issues of divorce. In some of these communities, you find that women are discouraged to commence a divorce proceeding because they are told it's going to disadvantage them. It's the man who married you, so you can't be the one to leave. He has to take you back either to your parents or he has to be the one to take the first step and divorce you. So a lot of women are still holding on to toxic and abusive marriages because they do not realize that they actually have this right to leave a marriage. And this is something that is actually recognized by our law. The third is to decide freely and responsibly on the spacing and the number of children. So this also speaks to the responsibility of both a woman and a man in this union. So you as a woman, I had spoken to it earlier when I was speaking to reproductive health, you also have that right to decide. And then there's also the issue of the welfare of the children. So our law recognizes that as a parent, irrespective of her marital status, because we have women who have children but are not married, the single mothers. So this law is recognizing that even if you're a single mother, you also have rights with regards to your children or to your child. These include the issues around guardianship, wardship, trusteeship. You can be a trustee, regardless of your marital status. Adoption of children also, as a woman, you have that right. You can adopt a child, regardless of your marital status. But of course, each and every component of the law is guided by a specific law. So for example, if you want to adopt a child, we have the Adoption Act. It provides on the procedure, how do you go about it, what do you need to put in place for you to actually get a legal adoption. So all these components have specific laws that speak directly to the issue. Then we also have the right to choose a family name. I know this also is in an African setup. Basically, you're supposed to take your husband's name. The children will follow suit. But this law is actually saying you, together with your spouse, can actually choose the family name that you're going to adopt as a family, the name that your children are going to use. So this also is a recognition that women equally have a voice and a say in a marriage setup. We can move on to the next. A woman has a right to choose a profession or an occupation. So as a woman, this is also part of empowerment. You can choose the profession that you want to take. If you want to be a nurse, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be an engineer, you actually have that right. This is something that should not be imposed for you just because of your status. The other right is to own, to acquire, to manage, to administer, and to dispose of property. This also is a recognition that as women, for the longest time, women would not have that opportunity to own property in their own name or to even manage property. It's either it's been managed under a husband, under a brother, under a father. But this law is actually highlighting to say, as a woman, you can also own property. You can manage property. You can even administer. It means that in issues around inheritance, you can actually be appointed as an administrator as a woman. You can dispose of property, meaning you can sell, you can go into a contract and sell of valuable property. You actually have that right. The other issue that we need to also know is that both men and women have equal rights before the law. So the law is not biased towards any particular sex. Whether a man or a woman, both have the same rights. Both men and women have equal access to justice and protection before the law. So whether a man or a woman, again, the law is not biased. It will not say because you're a woman, you get a lesser penalty, and because you're a man, maybe you get a harsh penalty. Both have the same protection before the law. Both have the same access to justice. However, in Zambia, I do not know about other countries. We are privileged that there are a lot of women's rights organizations that provide support for women. We have the Legal Aid Clinic for women specifically. We have NGOs that provide legal support to women. So there's that upper hand in terms of access to justice for women in Zambia. Then the other area is that both men and women have equal access and rights to credit, to capital, to a mortgage, to security, and to training. This also is very important because if you go in a rural area, very few women have the confidence to walk into a lending institution and actually get a loan or actually get a mortgage because they feel that it always has to be facilitated by a man. And also in the past, we had instances where women had to have their husbands, for those in a marriage setup, give their consent before a woman could access a loan, before a woman could access a mortgage. But this law is telling us that even you as a woman, you actually have that right to go and access credit, capital, and mortgage. So it means that this has empowered women to actually go into different empowerment programs through the different opportunities that are available. On a lighter note, it's a bit different for the men because we've had instances where men are able to go and get credit and the wife has no idea. Or they actually get a loan and put up a house as collateral security. And this woman one day just sees the bailiffs coming because she has no idea whatsoever that their property actually has been put up as collateral. So those are just some of those extreme cases that we have seen. So this is just to emphasize that as a woman also, you can actually access these services. Then there's also the aspect of access to water rights and property. So this emphasizes that both men and women have equal access to water rights and to property. We can move on to the next. So the last women's rights that I'm going to highlight is around the issues of modern, appropriate, and affordable technology. So this is just placing emphasis also that women have equal access to modern, appropriate, and affordable technology at at the same level as men. Then the last part also is very important for us to know as women that we also have the legal capacity to conclude contracts and any other legal instruments. It means that you have the legal capacity to go into a contract. You do not need to go through a third party. You have the legal capacity to acquire, to own, to inherit, and to administer property. It means that as a woman, you have the legal capacity to buy a house. You can buy a piece of land in your own name. You can inherit also. You can inherit as a wife, as a daughter. In the past, we had instances where, under customary law, women were not given their inheritance. If a family has a boy child and a girl child, preference will be given to the boy child, because the understanding then was that this girl is going to get married at some point, so she doesn't need to inherit this piece of land. So in those circumstances, a lot of young girls and women were being disadvantaged. So with the coming of this law, it's just emphasizing to say, even you as a woman, you can acquire property. Even you as a woman, you can inherit in your own right, not because you're a mother to a child, not because you are a custodian of these children, but in your own right as a woman, you can actually inherit property. You can also administer property. Like I said, we're going to talk more on this one when we speak to the issues around inheritance. But this is just an emphasis to say, even women in their own capacity can actually own, inherit, and acquire property. The last part is to choose a residence and a domicile. Again, prior to these provisions in our law, a lot of women were disadvantaged. They would find themselves in certain areas by force or by circumstances. But now, this is just highlighting to say, even as a woman, you can choose where you want to live. If you want to live in Lusaka, you want to live on the Copper Belt. So these are some of the provinces Leva in Zambia. You would want to move to the Copper Belt, or you want to move to Southern Province. You have that right to actually choose where you would want to reside. So this is the first part of our presentation. I really just wanted to highlight the women's rights that have been recognized by our law. I will pause for a minute just to ask for any questions or clarifications.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bessa. I'm going to come in and help you with the questions. At least I'm going to read the questions. And I think it's extremely important legal framework to protect women, like, and I think sometimes, I think it's all over the world, the case that we women are ingrained, socially constructed, like, or framed to think about ourselves, like, as dependents on somebody else, like, and I think to change this mindset that we are individuals and we are in charge of our bodies, of our life, of our assets, it's a kind of like a lot of work and a lot of effort, right? Like, and also because we have to come over and get away from the traditional norms. And as you talked about the legal system in Zambia, like, you have customary law as well. I know some points about this, like, and I think it's really, really hard for women to be between the two legal systems, right? Like, adhere to your own values and also kind of like be respectful towards your family members. So, but that's very, very insightful. Thank you so much, Bessa. Let me ask you the questions, or can you see them? Or if I can be of help, that's fine. Yes?
Yes, please go
Okay.
ahead and ask. I can't
So,
see them.
yeah, so there are some questions, and I'm going to start with the latest ones. So there's a question. You had mentioned that every woman has the right to say no if they don't want children. But what do you do if your partner wants a lot of children? How do you handle this situation? And then the following question is, can a woman tie her tubes with consent from the husband? Um, in the relation to this question. If I don't want to have children, how do I accommodate my husband's, my partner's wish to have a lot of children? And do I have the right to tie my tubes? Do I have to ask a consent from my partner in this case?
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. Firstly, I'll start by mentioning that in an ideal situation, both the man and the woman should be able to agree on certain issues, especially around children and the spacing of children. However, we are also alive to the fact that we don't live in the ideal world. We have the issues of oppression, we have the issues of violence. And one of the tools that I used is a woman's fertility. We have women who are controlled in their marital relationship by their husbands through the number of children they have. We have situations where a woman does not even have the breathing space to actually develop herself because she's constantly pregnant and having children, or because she cannot access reproductive health services. We also have women who hide the contraception they are on because they do not want their husbands to find out. So this man would just be surprised that, it's taking very long for the next child and the next child. But like I said, in the ideal situation, both partners should be able to decide. However, this law came in place to bring in a balance, to give a voice to the women also to decide. Of course, the first step would be for the two to have a discussion around it. If it's not going to work, unfortunately, you have to put your foot down as a woman. Remember, you have this right. You are the one who will carry the pregnancy. You are the one who will go and give birth. So sometimes you have to take the hard steps. Sometimes you have to really speak out for you to be heard. That is why we have this law that actually recognizes this as a right. With regards to tying of tubes, this is a permanent contraception. And even if you go to the hospital today, you'll be told you need to have the consent of your spouse. So that is a requirement, unfortunately. Unless if we do so much advocacy as women and say, can we waiver the consent? But otherwise, um, that is a requirement at the health center. You actually need the consent of your spouse. It's the same with the male contraception, which is the vasectomy. That one also requires consent of the spouse because this is something permanent. So it's something that both of you should be aware, even as you're taking that step. So to respond to that question, when it comes to tying of tubes, yes, consent is a requirement. Otherwise, the health providers will not attend to you. When it comes to saying no in terms of how many children you should have, as a woman, it is your right, but you also have to be strategic on how you approach the issue. You know your spouse better. If you're able to negotiate, well and good. If it's a very toxic and violent person, unfortunately, you have to take the hard steps for yourself because you have that right to make that decision.
Mm. Bessa, can I, like I'm a lawyer too, right? Like so lawyers love to play devil's advocate sometimes and ask hard questions. And I think this could be kind of like scenario which could play out, like in different situations, in a lot of situations, especially, like maybe not in the big cities. So if I say no, if as a woman, I don't want to have more children, right? Like so if I go for abortion, like so if I want to use a contraceptive, my husband or my partner could physically affect me too, right? Like forcing me physically with violence, like saying, no, you have to follow my rules because I'm the household, kind of like the key household person. What is an enforcement? Because the law is one thing, like, but the actual kind of like enforcement is the most important. And that happens all over the world. And like, if I go here in Italy and I live in Italy, if I go here in Italy to the police officer and I can say, there's a violence in the household, most likely they will not believe me, right? Like so, what is an enforcement framework for how protected women actually are in Zambia?
Okay. So when it comes to the protection of women's rights, there are different mechanisms that we have in place. So one of the results actually of saying no is violence. In most cases, you'd find that this partner or this husband now will become violent towards this woman. So in such instances where there's violence, it means that this woman has a right to report to the relevant authorities. So in Zambia, we have the Zambia police that has been given that power to receive reports of gender based violence. So that is classified as gender-based violence because there's a domestic relationship that is existing between this woman and this husband or this partner. So the Zambia police has been given that power to actually receive the case, investigate, and push it forward for prosecution. But then again, I should mention that it's not all gender-based violence cases that end up in court, then leading to incarceration. We also have cases where the police so there's a department, a specific department known as the Victim Support Unit. So the Victim Support Unit, these are officers that are trained in counseling. They've been trained on how to deal with gender-based violence cases. They actually do not even wear the police uniform just to make the public more comfortable to approach them. So some of them will step in and provide counseling, for example, depending on the intensity of that particular case. Because in some scenarios, all it needs is that this man, whether it's a husband or a partner, needs to be made aware of the provisions of the law. Remember, we live in a very consecutive, customary environment where the man has the final say. Custom has given men that power to decide on issues to do with their household. So, because of that, most men are not willing to give away that power. So, some of them are not even aware that we actually have laws that recognize women's rights. So, the police also come in to raise that awareness. But other than that, also, we have like I said, for women, we are privileged in Zambia that we have organizations that provide support for the protection of women's rights. So, for example, if you're based in Lusaka, you could go to YWCA, the Young Women's Christian Association. They provide legal support, they provide counseling. We have the National Legal Aid Clinic for Women, specifically a legal institution that provides legal services for women. We have organizations such as Women and Law in Southern Africa, WILSA. They also provide legal support. We have WILDAF, Women and Law in Development in Africa. All these organizations are aimed at providing the relevant support for women. Even at community level, even within your own community, you could actually ask. You might find that there are some community-based organizations that provide legal support. So all this is aimed at creating an environment where women can freely report issues that are affecting them. So when it comes to enforcement, it means that you have to go to an institution that will be able to provide the protection and also take you through the procedure for you to report your issue.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bessa. We already, I think it's really insightful presentation, and a lot of information I think, like we women can get out of this, which you present to us. We are running a little bit of time, short of time, but I want to take the final question, like on this part of women rights, and then we can go into the next part. So in a case where a couple is not having children, the blame always comes to the women. So basically, it's women's infertility, which is blamed for, and sometimes it leads to divorce. But would you advise, if that is a man, is a problem? What would you advise? Can I go for the divorce as a woman if my husband is infertile?
That's an interesting question. So when it comes to issues of infertility, the world is advancing. There are so many options. We now have the IVF clinics, where if you notice that there's a problem with either of the two, you could actually go and get a service. Then there's also an option for an adoption. If at all you're unable to have children, you could also decide as a couple to actually have uh, adopt a child. So those are the options that are available. But when it comes to infertility, and there are issues around, because this can also birth violence, it can birth promiscuity, leading to different infections coming in the home, because maybe this man now is trying to try out other women and see if at all he's the one with the problem or not. So this also can birth a lot of other issues. So as a woman, if you feel that you are being negatively affected, of course, this could be the root cause, but it's also based in other issues that may make it very difficult for you to live in that marriage. Yes, you can proceed and divorce. If you feel that you can't live with this man anymore because of the issues that are going on in that home. But otherwise, where there are no children, there are a lot of options that can be sought. But this is on a couple to couple basis, really. But yes, it can be a ground for one to seek a divorce.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bessa. So shall we move on? I think
Yes, please.
it's worthwhile to get to know more information. What do we have the rights wise in Zambia for women?
So we can move on to the next.
Inata? Yes. Okay.
Okay, so the next part, remember we said that as a woman, you also have the legal capacity to go into a contract. So this is just to highlight that a contract is an agreement between parties creating a mutual obligation that is enforceable by law. So as women, we go into different contracts. They range from business contracts, employment contracts, tenancy agreements, sale agreements, if you want to dispose of a car or a house or any other valuable property, a contract for you as a woman to supply goods and services. So these are just some of the examples. So this is just emphasis to say that as a woman, you actually have that right to enter into a contract. So one of the things that I just want to emphasize is that you need to ensure that you have a witness or witnesses that have the legal capacity. What does that mean? We know that as we go into the next slide, we'll see that there are certain individuals that do not have the capacity to go into a contract. An example is a child. You can't go into a contract with a child because a child does not have the legal capacity. So you can't say, no, I went into this contract to supply scones, and who signed this contract is a 13-year-old. That will not be enforceable by the law because the person that you're going into the contract with does not have the capacity. Also, always ensure that you keep a copy. Don't enter into a contract, just sign off one copy, and this copy is given to the other party. What happens if at all challenges arise or one of the two fails to honor up and you don't even have a copy yourself as a woman? So it's very important for us to ensure that we always keep a copy, a signed copy for our own reference, but also in case of any issues that may arise, we should be able to be in the position to actually produce a contract that outlines what was agreed upon. We can move on to the next. So what are the elements of a contract? Firstly, there has to be an offer. What is being offered in this instance? For example, if we're talking about a sale agreement, there has to be an offer to say this is what is being offered for sale. Then there has to be acceptance. So the other party will have to accept the offer that has been given. Then consideration. Depending on the provisions in that particular contract, there has to be some form of payment. Whether it's a down payment, is it a 50% payment? This is very dependent on the contract that has been entered into. But without this consideration, it may actually invalidate that particular contract that has been entered into. Then there's the issue of competence. Like I said, the person that you're going into the contract with, do they have the capacity to act? Like I said, there are certain individuals, a child, for example, you can't go into a contract with a child. You can't go into a contract with a person of unsound mind. By that unsound mind, I mean maybe the other term, which might be offensive, is a mad person or an insane person. You can't go into a contract with somebody who's of unsound mind. It's not going to be legally binding. Also, if it's an institution or it's a company, does the person we are going into a contract with have the authority for them to be able to sign off that contract? For example, if you're a supplier, let's say you supply uniforms, school uniforms, you can't go to a school and then sign off a contract with the cleaner or the guard. And then when you don't get your payment, you go back and you want to take legal action. The question will be asked to say, the person who signed this off, do they actually have the capacity or the authority for them to sign a contract? The last is that there's the aspect of legality. What you're entering into, this agreement that you want to enter into, is it legal? So you need to know there are certain businesses that are illegal in Zambia. An example that I would give is maybe a brothel. These are not allowed. They are illegal businesses. So you can't say, no, I went into this agreement, I even managed to get a house, and then people are now coming and you're making your money. That already is an illegal business. So it means that whatever contract you go in with these people will not be legally binding. So we need to be very careful as women. Let's ensure that whatever contracts we go into, whether it's a business, let's ensure that it's actually a legal business that will not land us into legal problems or legal implications. So yes, we want to make the money, but let's just ensure that whatever contracts we're going into are actually legal, so that there's that legally binding effect of the contracts that we go into. Then the last is, please let's ensure that all our contracts are written. It's so easy for us to have verbal contracts, maybe because you know this person or you've dealt with them before, but this sometimes can also backfire. So it's always safer to ensure that we always have written contracts. And you need to ensure that everything is put in writing. Don't leave out any provision, even those that are discussed after you have drafted the contract. You can always do an amendment, or you can always do an addendum to just add to say, okay, so after we signed, we also included this additional information. Just make sure that everything is put in writing to avoid complications in the future. So these are the issues that we need to know around the issues of contract. We have the capacity as women to enter into any agreement so long as it takes into account all these elements that I have mentioned, the issues of offer, acceptance, consideration, the competence of the person that we want to go into this contract with, and the aspect of legality. So I will pause here before we move into the other part of the presentation. Do we have any questions?
Do not have any questions on this, but because YouTube streaming is a little bit kind of like lagging behind, maybe, like some 3, 4 minutes, maybe the question's going to come later. But let me ask
Okay.
a couple of things like from my side as a lawyer. When I'm contracting with a legal person, legal entity, it could be company, or whatever incorporation type we have. There are some countries like where the stamp gonna define whether the contract is legal or not. In Zambia, so would it be enough if the person who is, let's say, in charge of dealing with the third parties signs a contract, or you also need to have the stamp from the company?
Okay. To be on the safer side, it would be better to have both, because we know of cases of forgery. We know of people impersonating
Yeah.
the head of an institution. So to be on the safer side, I would advise that you do both the signature and the stamp.
And also, I think like registration license is also very important, like just to be
Mhm.
sure, and that that person is the one who can sign on behalf of the company, and also the all the requisites and credentials and the stamp. We have a question. So, does it mean a woman can get a loan without the husband's consent? Can I go to the bank and get the loan, and I don't have to consult with my husband? I don't have to have a consent from my husband?
Yes, you have that right to go and approach any lending institution to actually get a loan. I think the only thing that we need to be conscious also is, what property are you putting as collateral? If, for example, you want to put a house where you are joint owners, it means that you need to get the consent of your partner. If the title is also in your partner's name, it will actually not even be admitted as collateral. So it's always just important for you to get those details. When it comes to loans, also as women, we need to know, do we have the capacity to pay back? Because there are a lot of women who've gone into debt and they don't even know how to come out of it. So let's also be very mindful. Do we have the capacity to pay back, even as we are going to access? The law, yes, has said we have the right, but let's also be very mindful in terms of our own capacity as women so that we can safeguard ourselves. Thank you.
Beth, there actually, when you talk about your own capacity to repay the debt, there's a question, and I'm going to read it. Then does it apply to people who are not working? Like for example, a woman is not working, like, and basically you don't have the capacity to pay back the loan, because you find a woman gets a loan who's not working, she gets a loan without the husband knowing, and then when paying back, it will still come to the husband. So, which is basically in favor of us women, right?
No, no. I think even as much as we uphold women's rights, let us also be very wise. It's the issue of capacity here. If you don't have the capacity to pay back, don't get the loan because it's going to land you in problems. And
But
those are
that,
some of the reasons. Those are some of the reasons why we have some women who are violated because maybe the husband finds out that this woman has all these loans from not only from lending institutions, even from individuals, and yet they do not have the capacity. So remember that you're also putting your own family at risk. So I think let's be very, very mindful of the issue of the capacity to pay back.
yes. And another question from my side, you were talking about a household, like house as a collateral, for example. Um, It is registered on my husband's name. So my husband goes for the collateral, right? And he might not repay that, like, and that means that me and my children might be forced to leave the house. But in the situation where I have been in the house, I have been helping the husband to build the house, like to ensure that we have the household together, but it's just legally not on my name. Do I have any rights as a woman with some practical evidence saying that I have contributed this money, and I've contributed this money to buy the bricks, whatever it is, like I have been living in the household for 20 years. I have been investing all my salary, like in household appliances, furniture. Now you are kicking me out. So is there any way how I as a woman can protect myself and my family and my kids?
That's a very tricky situation. I think one of the things that we need to know as women is what does it mean when we're talking about ownership. When we're talking about ownership, we're talking about the legal rights that you have in this particular property. And in most cases, what proof is there is the names that will appear on the title. So a lot of women have invested in properties that they don't even own. So long as your name is not there, it means that you're not the legal owner. The only other way that you can safeguard, if you feel that there's a risk that your partner or your husband can sell off this property or put it up as collateral, is that you can put a caveat depending on where you acquired this property from. If it's under the Ministry of Lands, you can apply for a caveat. So what you're going to be presenting to the Ministry of Lands is your marriage certificate to show that you are an interested party in that property. There are, of course, prescribed fees attached to that. Then there are also properties that are registered under the council. You can also go there and put a caveat as an interested party. But I think one of the takeaways that I would want to encourage women is that please ensure that you're part and parcel of the ownership. Let's not take it for granted that your partner or your husband has your best interest at heart. A lot of women have lost out because this man will go and get a loan, fail to pay it, the bailiffs will come, repossess, or sell off the property, and you remain with nothing. So let us secure our interest and our children's interest. How do we do that? If you want to also invest in that property, make sure that you're also at least on the title, either as a joint owner or it's owned as it's owned in tenants in common, where each one of you has an interest. Or you could own it as a trust on behalf of your children. But I think let us, as much as possible, secure our interests. Let's not wait, because by the time you're going, imagine you're going to put a caveat at the Ministry of Lands, you find that this property has already been sold off. It means that you'd have already lost out as a woman. Your children would have lost out. So let us secure our interests accordingly. Let's ensure that we are also on the title, because you have that right as well, especially that you're also going to invest in that property.
Right. Yes, thank you so much, Bess. And I think it's important to remember that nothing is permanent. We
Yeah.
get married with love, like an excitement, and with the future outlook, like everything is bright, right? But there are instances where the marriages don't end up kind of like nicely, like there are
Mhm.
divorces, and then maybe, a husband dies, and then if you haven't secured your legal rights in a legal way, then in these situations you might feel unprotected. And most importantly, kids might suffer, right? Like so.
Mhm.
So I think we can move on, Besha. Thank you.
Yes, please. We can move on to the next. Okay. Entrepreneurship, company registration. Most of us are now into a lot of side hustles. So we call them in Zambia labor. You might be in employment, but you have a small business on the side, or you actually have a big business going on. And maybe you plan on growing big. One of the things that we need to know as women is that you can actually register a company. It has a more legal effect, and also you'll be taken more seriously. If you're going to deal with bigger organizations, bigger companies, most of them would rather do business with a registered company. So let's take it upon ourselves as women to register our businesses, regardless of how small. You never know. It might actually grow, and you will need this legal identity for your business. So in Zambia, when it comes to company registration, we have an agency known as PACRA, which is the Patents and Companies Registration Agency. This one is we have one in Lusaka, but also in some of the provincial capitals across the country. So these ones are the ones who've been given that responsibility to register companies. So they have prescribed forms, they have prescribed fees. Again, I'm going to emphasize, as women, let us not be afraid to go to these institutions. Information is readily available. In Zambia, we have what is known as the Companies Act. So this is the one that prescribes the type of companies we have, what do you need for you to form a company, what is the legal standing of a company, how do you dissolve a company. So all those are provided for in the Companies Act. So I will just highlight two types of companies that are recognized. We have the private limited companies. These ones can be, just by the name, can be registered by individuals. We have the public limited companies, which even have a larger scale in terms of registration and so forth. So what is the procedure? The procedure that I'm going to speak to is provided for in the Companies Act. But also, if you take the time as a woman to go to PACRA, you'll find that some of this information is actually just stuck on the wall. You can read for yourself and you know which office to go to. So sometimes we take it for granted that every time you have to pay someone to do certain things for you. That is why, as women, we find ourselves in situations where things are not done according to the way that we would want them to be done. But it just takes the confidence to walk into this agency and ask the right questions. Look, I have this company that I want to register. What do I need to do? The following is the procedure, a very summarized procedure. Firstly, you need to choose your company type. What type are you registering? Is it a private limited company? Is it a public limited company? Is it a company by guarantee? And so forth. Then, secondly, you need to choose the company name. There are so many names in this country. Every day, people are registering their companies. So, you need to choose a name. What are you going to call your company? usually you're given an option to submit 3 names. And also, even as you're submitting those 3 names, you need to be aware that there are certain standards that have been set, even as you choose a company. I'll just give a one-off, an off-cuff example. You can't, for example, one of the biggest supermarkets we have in Zambia is ShopRite. You can't go and submit the ShopRite name. Already that will be declined because there's this big company that is known by that name. So there are all those issues around the company name that are actually prescribed by the Companies Act, but also you'll be guided at PACRA. Then you need to prepare the required documents, the articles of association. Articles of association basically speak to what are you about, you know, put in all those ideas in writing. How is your company going to be governed? Who are the directors? All that information is contained in the articles of association. So that is one of the documents that will be required. The company profile also, which is a more summarized version of your company name, the names of the directors, and so forth. Then we have the payment of prescribed fees. This procedure, I must mention, is not free. The fees are minimal, so you'll be guided. For example, if you are submitting the names, you'll be told, I think the last time I checked, it was around, is it 90 kwacha? 90 Zambian kwacha, somewhere there. So there are different prescribed fees for each of the documents that you're going to lodge in. But I must mention that most of these fees are very minimal. So it's something that is actually, I know affordable is a relative word, but it's something that you can actually put resources together and register your company. We can move on to the next. Okay, so like this is a more summarized detail. So the name clearance, after you've chosen the name, you submit the 3 options. So this is also just the process of checking for the existence of the proposed company and business. Like I said, every day people are going to PACRA and registering companies. Sometimes you might find that the name that you're submitting has already been submitted. There's already a company known by that name. So the only way you're going to be cleared is through this clearance process, where you are given an opportunity to submit 3 proposals. Once one of the names goes through, you're given a period of 30 days in which to finalize all the other processes. If this 30 days expires, it means that you have to redo it. You have to redo the process again. So even as you're doing one of these steps, just ensure that you have your documentation already together for the next step. Then in Zambia, our law provides that at least you should have 2 or more directors, and the executive director should be resident in Zambia. So with this, it means that you don't have to look for 6 or 5 directors. You can actually be you and maybe a colleague or a trusted friend, a trusted relative. That will suffice in terms of in terms of the submission of directors. Then again, there's the issue of capacity. Remember, always remember, don't do business with children. You have to ensure that whoever you're putting as a director on your list has the legal capacity. So the age also comes in. A child does not have the legal capacity. A person of unsound mind or an insane person does not have the capacity to be a director in your company. We can move on to the next. Also, you must have not been declared bankrupt under the Zambian laws. I'm sure we know the issue of bankruptcy. It means there's nothing at all attached to your name, which can be very, very dangerous. So they also just want to ensure that you have undischarged bankruptcy under any Zambian law. You are of sound mind. It means that you are sane. You know what you're doing. You have the right state of mind. Also, the issues around the company secretary, you should also appoint a company secretary. That person also has to be mentioned in the company documents. Then there's the articles of association also. So the way that it is that There are some that are prescribed, so you can just adopt them. So if you go to PACRA, for example, there are prescribed articles of association. If they align with what you want to do, you just adopt them. It means that you don't have to draft this particular document altogether. Then there are prescribed minimal capital. Like I said, depending on the company that you want to register, each one of them has the minimal capital that has been prescribed. So that information also is readily available at PACRA. If you don't have the time to go there physically, you can actually visit their website, and you'll find that this information is actually readily available. Life has been made very easy. You just go to their website, you'll be able to get the information from there. We can move on to the next. Okay, so the next slide is on the law on marriage. So in Zambia, we recognize customary, statutory, and religious marriages. Women, it's very important for you to know your status. Some people have stayed in relationships for years and yet they are not legally married. For them, they think they are married, but they've not followed the legal procedure. I should mention at this point that in Zambia does not recognize what's the word? Cohabiting. In Zambia, cohabitation is not recognized. No matter how many years you've stayed with this man, even if you go to the local court today, it will not be regarded as a marriage. So let us really, really be very conscious about our statuses in these relationships. So customary marriages, this is governed by customs. There are different customary practices that need to be followed depending on your tribe. So in Zambia, Leva, we have about 72 tribes. So each one have their own way of, they prescribe their own procedures for marriage. But basically, in most of these, you have to pay the bride price. So there are people who've stayed together and there's no payment of bride price. That one also is a very dangerous state for you as a woman, because it means that you have no legal standing in that relationship. You will not be recognized in an event of a death. You will not be recognized as a surviving spouse. In an event of dissolution of that relationship, you will not get any share in that property because you will not be a spouse. So we need to ensure that if you have contracted a customary marriage, make sure that the procedures were followed. Was money paid? Is there something written? Now, the local court even issues marriage certificates. So for those of us who are under customary marriage, you can actually go to the local court and get a marriage certificate. That way, you have a legally binding document. Then we should also know that customary marriage is polygamous in nature. It means that a man can marry more than one woman, and that is allowed. So if you're in a customary marriage, it means that your husband can marry another person, and that is allowed under customary law. Then the next is religious marriage. This one is governed by religion. In Zambia, mostly we have Christianity as the predominant religion. So you also follow the particular guidance given by that particular church. Certain churches even issue marriage certificates. So in most cases, you find that even those married under religious marriage, they still are connected either under customary or under statutory marriage. We can move on to the next. Statutory marriage, this one is the one that we actually have a law that speaks to it, the Marriage Act. This one is codified. So this is, there are different requirements for you to register your marriage under statutory. These are provided under the Marriage Act. You have to fill in a form. You have to submit the form to the local authority. The notice is given. There's a publication of the banns of marriage at the local council. And then the ceremony also has to take place in a designated place, a registered place. So once those requirements are followed, then you can be able to be issued with a marriage certificate. However, with statutory marriage, it's just one man and one woman. So if you're in a statutory marriage, you can't go ahead and marry somebody else. Then you'll be going against the law. Also, um, you can't be married under statutory law, then go ahead and contract a customary marriage with another person. That will still be illegal. So it's purely one man and one woman only. Then we can move to the next. This one is just a summary of how then do you dissolve a marriage. If it's a customary marriage, the court that has been given the power is the local court. So you can go there and buy summons, then the marriage will be dissolved. Or the bride price can be retained back to the man's family. That will suffice as the dissolution of this type of marriage. When it comes to religious marriages, we know that religion is against divorce. So mostly they leave it either up to the courts to dissolve the marriage or the family. We don't have any instances where the church has dissolved the marriage. Then the last is the statutory marriage. With the statutory marriage or the civil marriage, it's known as the civil marriage or the civic center marriage. For this one, it's the High Court that has been given the power to dissolve the marriage. So there's a prescribed procedure in our Matrimonial Causes Act here in Zambia. It shows how do you petition for divorce, what grounds can you use as a woman or as a man for you to dissolve this marriage, and then also what the procedure looks like. So I must mention, because there are a lot of myths surrounding these issues. When it comes to customary marriage, if you go to the local court, you have to have proof that indeed the marriage existed. Always remember to check the status of your relationship. Ensure that it's a legally recognized relationship. The local court procedure is it's not complex. It's a bit more straightforward. The one for the civil or statutory marriage, this one you need a lawyer to draft the petition for you and all the other supporting documents. So if at all you have a civil or statutory marriage, please seek legal aid. Those organizations that I had mentioned earlier, WILSA, the National Legal Aid Clinic for Women, or even Legal Aid Board, go there. They will be able to assist you to draft all the relevant documents, and also they'll be able to represent you in court until the marriage is dissolved. I also just want to mention this because there's a lot of myths surrounding the 2-year separation. I need to mention this because a lot of women are stuck in toxic and abusive marriages thinking they have to wait for 2 years to expire for them to lodge in a divorce petition. Our law provides that a divorce petition under civic or statutory marriage can be lodged a year after the marriage. So at any point, you can lodge in your marriage, your petition to divorce. You don't have to wait for the 2 years. 2 years is just one of the grounds. There are all these other grounds that you can rely on for your marriage to be dissolved. So I just thought I mentioned that because there are a lot of misconceptions around that. We can move on to the next.
Maybe Bessa, maybe we could stop for a bit, because there are some questions. Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So there's a question: is it okay for a spouse, and in this case it's our husband, to have only his name on the properties?
No, it's not okay. It means that he's the legal owner. You don't have the legal standing on that property. So whoever's name is on the title, that is the legal owner. That is why, as women, if we can't own property in our own name, at least let's push that our name is also on the title, either as a joint or as a tenancy in common. But let's have our name appear on the title. That is the only way we can safeguard our rights.
Mm, okay. Then you talked about cohabitation and that it's not legally recognized in Zambia. What about the situation if I do cohabit, like with a man, like with my partner, like, or maybe I just realize that our marriage is not legally recognized after living together for 15, 20 years. We have common children, we have common household. My rights are not legally registered on the property. And if in the case of his death, what happens with our common children? Do they have any rights to inheritance?
Okay, so that's actually the next slide.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, so we need to understand that in Zambia we have two laws that govern inheritance. We have the Interstate Succession Act. So this one speaks to distribution of property where there's no will, where a person dies and they've not left instructions. So this one has allocated percentages, what percentage goes to who. But it basically safeguards the welfare of the surviving spouse, the children, the parents, and the dependents. These are the ones that are covered under this law. So it actually provides for percentages. There's the 20% for the surviving spouse, there's a 20% for the parents, there's a 10% for dependents, and then there's a 50% for children. So all these also needs to be defined. Who's a spouse? Again, it takes us back to marriage. If you are not legally married, it means you're not a surviving spouse. It means you can't inherit this 20%. Children. Children is a bit more broad because it covers the children in the marriage, those born outside the marriage, those adopted legally, or those who benefit under the percentage of the one allocated to children. The parents also are their surviving parents. If they are alive, then they will get their percentage. The law also provides for different scenarios. Maybe, for example, there are no children. Where does the 50% go? So it distributes accordingly. Where there are no dependents and so forth. It also provides for appointment of an administrator or administrators because it can be more than one person. So the appointment of administrators, there are two courts that have been given the power, depending on the size of the estate. So when I'm talking about the estate, I'm talking about the property that has been left behind. If the estate is of a big magnitude, the letters of appointment for administrator have to be obtained from the High Court because of the huge estate. If it's a minimal or a small estate, you can get your letters of appointment from the local court. There, they'll be guided on what are the duties of the administrator. But also, this law provides for the offenses related to inheritance because we have people who deprive beneficiaries. That is a crime. Property grabbing is a crime. Property grabbing meaning you go and get property that is supposed to go to the beneficiaries. You decide, you're not even a beneficiary, you decide to get it for yourself. That is an offense under the Zambian laws. So those are the issues around inheritance. Then there's the Wills and Administration of Testate Act. This one deals with those people who die and they leave instructions. They leave a will. They have outlined how they want their property to be distributed. Under this one also, the appointment of a person known as an executor or executors is done at the High Court. So there's a whole probate procedure that is done at the High Court. Guidance is given on how that should be done. But I should mention that also when you're looking at a will, the law also looks at the interest of the immediate family because we have people who have a tendency of giving instructions, leaving out the children or the surviving spouse. We have people who've written a will and they've just given their friends property, they've given other relatives, but they've left out the surviving spouse and the children. In such cases, that will can be contested. You can go to court and say this will is not properly done. It has left out the important beneficiaries. So we can move on to the next.
Mm.
Okay. So this one also is speaking to the appointment. This is under the Testate Act, where there's a will. So it provides how do you appoint an executor, what are the duties. So an executor is very similar to an administrator. The only difference is an executor is appointed where there's a will, an administrator is appointed where there's no will. Also, this law outlines the different offenses related to wills because we have people who conceal. You know that there was a will left behind, you hide it. That is an offense. Or you know there's a will, then you destroy it. That also is an offense. So there are different offenses also that have been identified. I also just want to emphasize that it has to be a valid will. So how do you know that this is a valid will? It has to be an instruction that is signed off by the deceased in the presence of at least two witnesses who also have to sign because people have forged wills. Some have just drafted and forged signatures. So for it to be valid, we need to follow that. However, there are exceptions. I'm sure you've heard of people who give an oral will and so forth. So there are also those exceptions that are given by the law. Where can you keep your will? The will can be kept at the bank, at church, with your lawyer, with your employer. I would also just want to encourage women to go into a habit of drafting wills. Yes, death is uncertain, but if you own property, you own businesses, it's always safer for you to draft a will so that you safeguard the interest of your children and your loved ones. So I would encourage women to actually ensure that you also draft your own will, how you want your property to be shared after your demise. That is also very, very important. Then I will go to the question, because this is the last slide. I will go to the question that was asked. Where you've been cohabiting, you have children, and you have property. Then this person dies. What happens? Number one, did this person leave a will? If they did, those instructions will be followed. What, how do they want their property to be distributed? If they died without a will, it means that the children are safeguarded because remember, there's that percentage provided. But you, as a woman, unfortunately, you will not get the share as a surviving spouse because you're not a legal wife. Unfortunately, the least you can do is you can be given an allocation in the allocation for dependents because then you'll be seen as the person who had relied on the deceased for your livelihood. So you see why it's very important for us to know our statuses in these relationships. Because imagine spending 20 years with this person and for you not to be recognized as a surviving spouse, not for you to get your allocation as prescribed by the law. The least you can get is an allocation for a dependent. I think that is not a good thing at all. And also this property, remember, in who's the owner. It brings us back to ownership. Who is the legal owner? Because you're only going to make a claim if you're part of the ownership, if your name is mentioned anywhere. If not, it will be very difficult for you to pursue this matter. It's the same as not only death, but there's also the end of the relationship. So now you end this relationship 20 years later. How are you going to share the property? You can't go to court and say I was the spouse because you're not the spouse, regardless of the duration of your relationship. So for us to avoid all these complications, it's always safer for us to legalize the relationships. Even if you've spent 20 years together, you can always follow procedure. Either you go the customary way, let this partner pay the bride price so that you seal the relationship. If you don't want to go the customary way, go to the local authority and register your marriage as a civil marriage. so that you get a marriage certificate. It doesn't matter how long you've stayed all these other years, but so long as you're able to legalize your relationship, then you safeguard your interest as a spouse in that relationship. So I will pause here.
Okay, thank you so much, Gasa. I think it's really, really great, and I think I learned a lot about Zambia and Zambian legal system. I will ask one cheeky question at the end, just to have some fun. But there are some questions which are important to ask, like, and to get some insights. So, what happens to the property in a case where the surviving spouse decides to remarry or get married? So, basically, if I'm a woman, a husband has died, I have a property, and then I get the property, and then I decide to remarry.
Okay. So with that one, what our law provides is that a surviving spouse has what is known as life interest in the property. So depending on the number of, let me give this scenario. If this couple only had one house, yeah, they were married for a long time, the spouse dies. So that house will be known as the matrimonial home. There are two beneficiaries that have interest: the surviving spouse and the children. However, the surviving spouse only has life interest, which means that if you remarry, you lose your life interest. The house now becomes solely for the children. So if you decide to remarry, it means that you lose your life interest in that house. That is what our law provides. So
So, basically,
so you lose that interest that you had. So that is the condition that is given
hmm.
in the Zambian law.
So, and there's no any kind of like time limitation. So basically, if I, for example, if that's my inheritance, like that comes into my asset pool, and I'm the legal owner of that. And then if I remarry, let's say in 10, 15 years, I'm still gonna lose it.
Yes.
Mm.
So the difference here is that, like I said, there are different scenarios. Yeah. If for example, there was a will and you were given this house, it means that you're now the legal owner. It means you can even go and change title because it's yours.
Yes.
Yeah, that is different. It means that that is your property. But then when it comes to scenarios where there's no will and there's only this one house, remember, you're not the only one who has interest. There are also the children because it's the matrimonial home. So the only right you have is life interest. So the moment you remarry, you lose it.
Okay. If it's a will, so it's my legal property, like I register on my name, right? Like so.
Yes.
But if there's no will, like, and especially if there are children living together in the house, like if
Mm.
I remarry, then the house, like goes into the property of children. Okay, good.
Yes.
Um, so there's another one question, Betha. How does the oral will work? Should there be any recordings as proof? Can you do let's say mutually agreement, like to make an oral will, not written?
Hmm. Well, the most advised is the written will. The Tested Succession Act has certain exceptions. One is for those in the army, those who go to war. That is an exception. Let's say you've gone to war in Iraq, you are at the battlefield, and then the opposition or the other camp shoots you, and there's no hope for you to leave after that. Then you whisper or you say something to a colleague that can be taken as valid. So that one is an exception. So it's not all cases. You don't just say, for me, I'm not going to do a written, I want to do oral. No, there are exceptions that have been allowed by the law. Also, there are those who are in a very, very critical condition, let's say in hospital, and this is like your last day of life. and you don't have the strength to actually write something down. So you can actually give the oral
Mm.
instructions, but it has to be before two witnesses so that somebody else can write down what it is that you're saying, because you don't even have the strength to sign it off. It can be signed off on your behalf, and the witnesses also can sign. So there are very, very limited exceptions. The one that is recognized is written, unless you fall under those exceptions for
Mm.
it to be considered as a valid oral will. So it's not in all circumstances. There are special circumstances that are allowed by the law.
And these exceptions will be stated in the law, right? Like so.
Yes, yes, we have them in the Wills and Testate Act.
Okay. Okay. Good. I think also I would like to go back to the company registration a little bit. And while we are waiting for some questions online. Um,
Mhm.
So I know, and this is something, like where the whole world is struggling with an informal economy. It's in Africa, here in Europe, like so. A lot of people decide to go into entrepreneurship, but not to form and register a company legally, because we think it's going to be like there will be tax payment, like the government gonna
Yes.
overview me, supervise me, like, and I will have to fill all the bureaucracy documents and so on. But I think, like especially for women and the women in rural areas, right? Like there could be also a lot of benefits as regard to social protection, where which would increase the incentive to register the company, right?
Mhm.
Like, can you just a little bit talk about, let's say, the tax, like I don't know, like social security, like pension, whatever it is, like which could incentivize women to register for this step, into official economy, like and know that they're going to be more protected from the government perspective, like if something happens to them.
Yeah, so there are a lot of economic benefits, both economic and legal benefits of registering a company. I will start firstly to mention that when you register a company, it becomes a separate legal entity. So it's separate from you. So if I register a company as Vesa Limited, it means that the business of this company is separate from me as an individual Vesa. It means that even in an event of, let's say, legal issues, it's not me who will be prosecuted, but it's the company, because this is a separate legal entity. And also, with regards to recovery of debt and so forth, it's the company property that will be disposed of to pay off those debts. So you will not come to my home and get my stove, for example, or my sofas and say, no, because they are one and the same. We're not one and the same. It's a separate legal entity. So I think that is the protection that is there for us as women. Yes, the tax is there. There you'll be required to retain prescribed tax fees. But also, that is a way that we contribute to the development of the economy generally. But also, it means that, like I said earlier, if you have a registered company, it's easier for you to go into bigger transactions because then you'll be legally recognized. And also, the fact that you adhere to tax returns, it means that the other businesses or individuals that you'll be dealing with will be more confident to work with you because they know that you're um, a law-abiding citizen. So those are some of the benefits. Also, with regards to returns, you can use your company to pay returns, for example, at NAPSA. So NAPSA is more of a social security scheme here in Zambia. You could use that avenue also to secure your own social security for yourself and maybe for maybe the employee, whether you only have one employee or so forth. You can be able to use your company registration to actually do some of these other legal processes that are required for you to do. So as a woman, don't hold back. Like I said, these tax payments are very minimal based on your minimal capital. How much are you investing in this business? For example, if you're investing only a 5,000, you'll not be expected to pay 4,000 as tax. There's a threshold for each minimal capital that you're going to declare as you're registering your company. So this is something that definitely is the way to go, especially that we are working towards the empowerment of women. We don't want the women to be left behind. And the only way we can do that is we need to legally have our companies registered so that we are taken more seriously, but also the general public has more confidence to do business with us.
Yes, I think this a final aspect which you mentioned, confidence, that's very much linked with one of the other benefits which we can get when we talk about the
Mhm.
official registration of the company. It's confidence and also the reputation. My reputation, like as a company, as a person, right, is one thing which is extremely important. We want to do the business with other companies. They're going to trust you. They're going to have a
Mhm.
reputation. Like there's somebody else going to be able to suggest you as a supplier, buyer, or like business partner. And I think here the legal registration is extremely important to build this trust and reputation as
Yeah.
well. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Bessa. But then another kind of like thing which I have seen like basically here in Europe, maybe that's different in Zambia. Um, a lot of people actually are afraid to register the company because they consider that basically dissolution of the company, closing the company, going to be very, very difficult, right? Like so you have
Mhm.
to go through the paperwork, you have to prove you are incapable to make money or whatever it is. How it is in Zambia? Is it easy to close a company?
Well, we have, like I said, the governing law is the Companies Act, so it provides for the procedure for the dissolution. Of course, it's a bit more complex. The bigger the company, the more complex it is. But the smaller the company, the easier the procedure. So yes, there's a dissolution procedure, but I think one of the things that I want to mention from my presentation is that as women, we are very privileged. We are so privileged to legal aid. Let's utilize those spaces to get information and assistance. Whether it's company related, whether it's acquisition of land, whether it's around marriage, we have a lot of NGOs that provide support. So even if you're dissolving your company and you don't know how to go about it, you can easily approach any of these organizations and they'll be able to provide the support for you as a woman because there's so much support that is going in for women. Also, some of this legal aid is even free of charge. You're not even paying anything at all for you to be guided on how you can go about some of these processes. The law is there. The only thing you need is the legal guidance. So you just need to go to the right places and you'll be supported. So even when it comes to dissolution, yes, we have the procedure in the Companies Act, but that should not scare you. There will always be a way to go around it if you get the legal support that you need.
Bessa, may I ask you maybe, like, could you provide now, but maybe a little bit later, like, and we can share with our ladies, maybe you can provide
Mhm.
some couple of suggestions of the organizations, like in your organization too, I
Sure.
hope, that we can reach out just in case, like, because I think it's very typical, like for ladies to question what are my rights, like, and maybe
Mhm.
also typical to be unsafe or insecure to go and find the help, right? Like and ask a question. So if you could provide us with some guidance, this, like where we can go, that would be really lovely.
Yeah, sure. I
The
could share a
ladies.
list. Yes, I could share a list that can be circulated. Then I think there's the last part on land. Just one more slide.
Okay, and then there's one question or so.
Okay.
Let me ask the question because it's related to companies, like, and then we can go into the land, right? And it's a
Okay.
quick one. So the question is about taxes. Taxes are actually based on turnover or profit, depending on the tax registered for. What would be the money I'm paying the tax on? Profit?
Okay. So it's usually around the profit. It's usually around the profit. Remember, when you're registering your company, you're also declaring um, your minimal um, your minimal income or expenditure. So that is what is going to determine how much tax you're going to pay to the relevant authority. So for us, we have the Zambia Revenue Authority, ZRA. So once you declare, then you'll be advised on how much you're supposed to retain based on that information that was provided when you were registering the company. And remember, they're also, these are not static. These documents are not static. These are documents that can be amended. So, for example, if your company even grows bigger, I know a lot of people will still conceal the information because you don't want to pay, uh, you don't want to pay a higher tax return. But it's always important for us to declare the accurate picture when it comes to how much it is that we're making as a company. It's very, very important for us to do that. Because sometimes you might get away with it today, but sometimes these institutions do um, spot checks. They might visit your company, look at your books, and find that what is happening on the ground is different to what you're declaring, and you may get in trouble. So the best is for us to give accurate information always so that we don't find ourselves in trouble.
And that goes very much in line with the reputation, right? You don't want to be
Yes.
a company with a bad reputation. And then, of course, like the business partnerships will be not easy to build. Okay, Dina,
Yes.
do we go into the next slide on the land,
Which is the
property?
next. So this is land acquisition. Uh, I was once told that it's always important to own land, regardless of the size. So, as women, let's acquire the land, regardless of the size. So, land ownership is very important for women because it's an aspect of economic empowerment. It also provides us with income because you can use it for farming purposes. You could build and rent out your property. It's also a form of security. So it's very important for us to own this land in our own rights. How do we own? We can either purchase, we can inherit, or it can also be a share after a marriage has been dissolved. So I just want to emphasize that there are two types of land tenure in Zambia. There's customary land. So customary land, the custodians are the traditional leaders. Some of us on this call own traditional land. So when you own traditional land, it's not in your own right. Please remember that because you are basically just a custodian. So at any point, it can be given back to the traditional leaders. So you're not, it's not owned in your own right. So if you have access to traditional land or customary land, please keep that in mind. Most of this customary land is even not on title. There are no title deeds given because you are basically just a temporal custodian of this piece of land. Then there's statutory land. This one can be acquired either through the Ministry of Lands or through the local authority, the council, or even an individual who already has title. They can sell you statutory land because it's already titled. So I just thought that I highlight the two because there are a lot of people who are owning customary land which has not been converted. So the Lands Act actually provides that you can convert customary land into statutory land so that you can have a title deed. When you have a title deed, it means that you are now the legal owner. If you have land and it's still customary, please remember that you are a temporal custodian and at any point it can be given back. So let us ensure that for those of us who own customary land, let's ensure that we start the process of converting. You will need authorization from the traditional leaders. They will need to sign off a consent, which you have to take if it's under, you have to take to the local authority for them to start the process of converting so that you can be given title. So I just thought that it's very important for women to know that the two different types. So you can fall under any of the two, but it's always safer to own statutory land because then you'll be able to acquire title and you'll be the legal owner of this type of land. We can move on to the next. Yeah, and that's the end. Um, I really hope I was able to highlight the key areas, the key legal issues that affect us as women. And also the different legal provisions that we have in Zambia with regards to women's rights.
I
So
think
I will
that's
leave it here and open it up for questions.
I think Bessa, it was really fantastic presentation, and I think like it gave a lot of information for the thought, like to think about like what are our rights as women. I think you have followed with all of the questions here, but I have maybe like two questions. One about the customary land, like, and I could, as a devil's advocate again, like I could imagine the situation where I am working, like toiling the soil on the customary land for years. For example, I grow vegetables,
Yes.
like plants, like and everybody assures me that because you're working there, like you have the title of the land, like you have the rights on that land, right? But then from what you say, until I register legally the title on that land, or I ask of this opportunity, I don't have any rights if I work there.
Well, so even as I'm saying, you're a temporal, you're a temporal custodian. In most cases, there isn't a prescribed duration. There are people who've stayed on that land for so many years. They've even built on that land, and so forth. The only thing that disadvantages one under customary land is that you're not the legal owner. You don't have the actual ownership. That is why our Lands Act also provides for converting. You can convert from customary to statutory land. And the only thing that needs to be done is that you need to get clearance. I'll call it clearance because you need to get the approval from the traditional leaders. If they sign off the documents, you start with the local authority, you go to the council and say, I have this piece of land. I was given by this particular chief or this headman. I've been living on this land maybe for 5 years or 2 years, and I would want to convert it to statutory land. You'll be given the prescribed forms. Then also, it will be required that something written, a written consent, is done by the traditional leader, by the chief. They need to sign off that they've allowed you to convert. I think the idea there is that, like I said, we recognize both customary and statutory land. We still have traditional leaders in most of these areas. So one of the reasons why there's this component of customary land is also not to take away the power of the traditional leaders in these areas. Because what then would happen is if all the land is converted to statutory land, it means that the traditional leaders are not going to have any power and control in their chiefdoms because then they'll be dealing with landowners. So there's also that regulation. That is why you cannot convert minus the consent of the traditional leader in that particular area. They need to give the consent that you can convert. So regardless of how many years you stayed there, so long as it's still customary land, it can be taken away from you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think it was really, really great. And can I just give you some feedback, like what the ladies are writing? So presentation was on the spot. Interesting, nice, very interesting. It was really an insightful presentation, so knowledgeable. It was very interesting presentation. Would you mind sharing your email in case I want to find out something? So this is the feedback from our ladies who are listening to us today. Thank you so much, Bessa. And I think what I'm convinced more and more that we have to talk more about women's rights, like what we can do, what we can't do. Also, we're going to have the closing ceremony in May in Lusaka. I'm going to be there, and I hope we can facilitate some workshops on legal affairs of women together with you, Bessa, and your organization, and share this information with more and more women so they know that they are safeguarded, they are protected by law, their rights are protected by law. So it's important to take responsibility or life in our hands and protect ourselves, like from any legal challenges, legal issues, or violence at home or on the street. So it's in our hands to do it.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Bessa. Any parting words from you?
I'm really honored to be given this opportunity to make this presentation and also to interact with the women. I think it's an area of passion for me. Having worked for a women's legal rights institution, where we've seen how violations can actually affect the livelihood of women, and also the gap in information on how a lot of women are disadvantaged without knowing that there are actually platforms where they can go to and get the assistance that they need. So I've just typed out some organizations where women can go to get assistance. I've also typed out my email address for those who would want to reach out for more information in the chat, so that they can be advised or referred to relevant organizations that can provide the necessary support. So yes,
And
it's been a very, very good interaction. Thank you.
thank you so much, Bessa. And I hope we're going to see you in May and your colleagues as well. And we're going to talk more in depth, like about different questions. Thank you so much. And thank you, lady. I hope you did enjoy, and I hope you um, are elevated, enlightened, and empowered by all of these kind of things we learn. Okay, thank you so much, Bessa. Thank you.